Welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. Today we are in Genesis 11. It is a very interesting story, and one you were probably familiar with as a child. It's the Tower of Babel. And we're going to begin here in Genesis 11:1. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. Now this does not cause a problem for us if we start in Genesis 11:1, but if you've been reading the Bible all the way through, you may have noticed in Genesis 10:31, 2 verses earlier, that it says, "These are the sons of Shem by their clans and by their languages." So 2 verses earlier, it indicates that the clans of Shem have languages, and now 2 verses later, it's going to tell us the whole earth had one language and one word. How do we answer that? How does that work? And people will say, see, the Bible has contradictions. It does not have contradictions. There's a reason we skipped chapter 10 in our study here. Chapter 10 is genealogy. Chapter 10 takes the 3 sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and it gives us their descendants, a very long list of descendants. And so what it's doing is it's showing us kind of the nations that came from Noah and his sons on the ark. And after they got off the ark, it starts, in fact, with the son that Shem had 2 years after the flood, which is probably 1 year after they got off the boat, because they were on the boat for a year and 10 days. But anyway, it's this long genealogical kind of, report. Here's this family history of these 3 guys. And then chapter 11 is now reminding us, is taking us back to when the whole earth had one language. So that puts us closer to when Shem, Ham, and Japheth got off the ark. Of course, they're brothers. They all have the same language. So it puts us a little bit closer back in that time. And this is before the Tower of Babel. This is when everybody still had one language before God confuses the language. And it says here in verse 2, "And as the people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. And they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly.' And they had bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth.'" So there are 3 things they want to do here. They want to build a city with a tower that reaches all the way up to the heavens, and they want to make a name for themselves so that they will not be dispersed over the whole earth. 1, 2, and 3. A city, tower up to heaven, a name for themselves. They don't want to be dispersed over the whole earth. And then verse 5 comes, and I think this is hilarious. And it says, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower." And the reason that's funny is because they have built a city, and they're building a city with a tower. They're trying to get to heaven, and God goes, "Let me come down and see this little tower that you've built." And so God comes down to see the little tower that they built. And it says this, beginning in verse 5, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will be impossible for them. Come now, let us go down there and confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth." Now, catch the symmetry in this. Up here in verse 4, right, we see that, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to heaven." And then down here in verse 5, God had to come down to see their city. So they didn't make it to heaven. Their first goal, they didn't achieve. Their second goal up here was, let us make a name for ourselves. And then if you follow that down here to verse 7, it says, let us confuse their language, essentially keeping them from being able to do, remember what he said, if they have one language, nothing will be impossible for them. So he confused their language. And then in the third point from chapter 4 is, we don't want to be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. And then if you follow that down here to verse 8, so what did God do? He dispersed them throughout the whole earth. So the 3 goals that they had, God defeats, God undoes it, so that they are not able to accomplish those things. Therefore, verse 9, "Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the languages of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of the earth." Babel will become Babylon. And so Babel is going to be Babylon. It is of huge biblical significance. This shouldn't be a surprise to you that these things that are happening in the Bible have much bigger implications than the small verses they're contained to. We're first introduced to Babylon in Genesis 10:25, where we're introduced to a man named Nimrod. Which, if you know anything, right, like Nimrod is not a positive thing. You don't want to be called Nimrod. But the Bible calls this guy Nimrod, and he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And Nimrod is instrumental in building 2 empires, the Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire. He's the one that builds Babel, and Babel becomes Babylon. And Assyria and Babylon are the enemies of God throughout the Old Testament. Babylon isn't just a physical country. It's not just a physical people that are opposed to God. The Bible also uses Babylon from a spiritual perspective. In Revelation chapter 18, spiritual Babylon, not just a nation of people, but Babylon, everything that is opposed to God is destroyed finally by God, and Babylon is brought to nothing. And so we see that in Revelation 18 and Revelation 19. And so here, Babylon, is this opposition to God. It's people saying, we're higher than God. We're going to raise ourselves up to be higher than God. We're going to be equal with God. We're going to make a name for ourselves. We won't be dispersed throughout the whole earth. And mankind here, what's really happening here in Babel is these people are seeking to elevate themselves to be higher than God, which sounds a little bit similar to Genesis chapter 3, where Satan lied to Adam and Eve and said, look, you can be like God. This is a way for you to be like God. And so here again, we see people seeking to be like God, and there being consequences for it. And spiritually speaking, Babylon now will be against the things of God forever. Now, I said that Nimrod was mentioned in Genesis 10:25. That's actually not correct. I'm sorry. He's mentioned in Genesis 10. I forgot to make note of it here for me. Genesis 10:25, though, is significant because in Genesis 10:25, we're introduced to a man named Peleg. And it says, in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided. I do not believe for a moment. Some people think that this is when the earth broke up and all the continents shifted. I don't think that's what's happening here at all. In the days of Peleg, the earth was divided. I think this is the story of the Tower of Babel. Everybody had one language. When did the languages get injected into this long line of genealogy in chapter 10? Probably 10:25 is where the earth was divided, where the peoples were divided into different people groups and different nations. His name, Peleg, means division. And so that's probably when that happened. Now, Shem's descendants is going to give us Shem's descendants. And there's a lot of information here. And we're not going to go through every one of these people. So Shem is the father of, I have never felt comfortable saying this guy's name, Arpachshad. I don't know. How do you say Chshad, right? It's insane. So this is why I'm skipping most of these. Not really, but these are the descendants. Here we have the descendants of Shem in these next few verses. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Nimrod. Chapter 10, verses 8 through 11. I knew I'd made a note about it somewhere. So one of the things that I want you to see here that's super, super interesting is keep in mind the three things, right? They wanted to build a tower that reached heaven. They wanted to make a name for themselves, and they wanted to not be dispersed in the whole earth. All these things in the Bible happen, and so then there's kind of an undoing of these things. And so there's a creation, there's an undoing of the creation, there's a creation, and then there's a recreation where God makes things new. So there's all this repetition in the Bible. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I don't want you to miss this. So the aim of the people in Babel, build a tower to God so they could reach heaven, make a name for themselves and not be dispersed. In Revelation chapter 21, this is beautiful. In Revelation 21, 1 through 4, it says that the New Jerusalem descends down out of heaven and God makes his dwelling with man. Go all the way back in our minds to Genesis 11. What were the people trying to do? They were trying to reach heaven. And in Revelation 1, God brings heaven down. He brings the New Jerusalem, the new city of God, down to earth to make his dwelling with man. So in Genesis 11, the people are trying to reach heaven, can't. They're too small. God has to condescend himself, come down to see what stupid things that they're doing. But in Revelation 21, he makes the new heavens and the new earth, the new Jerusalem, and brings the new heaven down so he can dwell with man. Now remember, what was the second thing they wanted to do? They wanted to make a name for themselves. And in Revelation 22, 3 and 4, the Bible says that God has gathered all these people together and he has put his name on their foreheads. It's interesting to me how many times Christians will talk about the mark of the beast from Revelation. And there's a lot of emphasis about the mark of the beast. Don't get the mark of the beast on your forehead. Don't get the mark of the beast on your wrist. And that's not even a concern for the Christian. A Christian's not going to do that. Why? Because Revelation tells us that the believer has actually been marked on their forehead with the name of God. Like we've been sealed by God. And so Revelation 22, I think 21, Revelation 22, 3 and 4 says that God has given everybody his name and has put his name on their head. So first thing, they're trying to make a city to heaven. That doesn't work, but God brings heaven down in Revelation. They're trying to make a name for themselves. That doesn't work, but God gives mankind his name and puts his name on the hearts of mankind. And then in Revelation 5 and 7, we see that God, and this is crazy. Now think about this. The Tower of Babel, was the place where everybody had been unified and God scattered them. And he kept them from making a name for themselves, kept them from reaching heaven. And in Revelation, what God does is Revelation 5 and Revelation 7 says he gathers people from every tribe and every tongue and every language to himself, gives them his name, and then makes his dwelling with them as he builds a new city. So there's this beautiful reversal of the Tower of Babel in the book of Revelation, where instead of a dispersal, there is a coming together of all the peoples, all the tribes, all the tongues, all the nations into one, into the people of God, marked on the forehead with the name of God, dwelling in the city of God that he built. And we don't have to try to reach heaven anymore because he has brought New Jerusalem down to earth, and we make our dwelling with him and he with us. So I love this. I think that this is incredibly beautiful. I think it's an incredible reversal of what we see in Babylon. And again, it's accomplished through the person and the work of Jesus Christ. This is kind of the antithesis of Jesus here in Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. This is all the bad. This is all the undoing of the good things. And then God will make everything new. And so keep that in mind that next time you read the Tower of Babel. I wanted to introduce you to Abraham today, but let's just quit with the Tower of Babel. We are going to meet Abraham tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to it as we get into chapters 12 and 13 of Genesis. We'll see you then. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible through another section of Scripture where we come to know and understand God a little bit better. Look, if you're brand new to Simpler Bible, we have all sorts of resources available for you. Go to our website, simplerbible.com, and there you can find these videos, you can find our podcast, you can find links to our social media, and you can even find a blog post with additional scriptures if you want to go into a little bit more study than we had time to cover in this podcast and video today. We hope that this tool will be exactly that for you, a tool. Not something that replaces your daily walk with God, but something that enhances your daily walk with God and helps you to know and enjoy Him more. Thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll see you again tomorrow.